Before this story ends, you'll question how well you really know the people sitting right beside you. One quiet question, one shared table, and a truth so shocking, it changes a man's life forever. If you believe kindness still matters in a world that's forgotten it, subscribe now, because stories like this don't just entertain, they remind us who we are. The diner smelled of burnt coffee, cheap syrup, and rain-soaked coats, the kind of place where time seemed to stall somewhere between regret and routine, and Mark Callahan liked it that way because routine was the only thing holding his life together after everything had fallen apart. He sat in the corner booth with his 7-year-old daughter Lily, her legs swinging beneath the table as she colored quietly on a kid's menu, her tongue poking out in concentration the way her mother's used to before cancer took her 2 winters ago, and Mark forced himself not to think about that now because Sundays were supposed to be easier days when he pretended the world hadn't crushed him under unpaid bills, double shifts, and the constant fear of failing the only person who still called him dad. The waitress had already dropped off their plates, pancakes for Lily, eggs and toast for him, and Mark was calculating in his head whether he could stretch the last $40 in his wallet through Friday when he noticed the woman standing beside their table. She looked small somehow, wrapped in a thin, worn coat despite the heat blasting inside the diner, her shoes scuffed, her hair pulled back too tightly as if she hadn't looked at herself in a mirror for a long time, and when she spoke her voice trembled just enough to make him uncomfortable. "I'm sorry," she said softly, eyes flicking between Mark and Lily, "can I share this table?" Mark glanced around. Half the diner was empty. He almost said no out of reflex, the instinct to protect his fragile bubble, but Lily looked up first, her wide eyes curious, and smiled. "You can sit with us," she said before Mark could answer, and the woman's face changed instantly, relief flooding her features like she'd just been spared something terrible. "Thank you," she whispered, sliding into the booth across from them, keeping her hands folded in her lap like she didn't want to touch anything. Mark nodded stiffly, already regretting it, telling himself he didn't have the emotional energy for strangers, but then Lily pushed her plate slightly forward. "Do you want a pancake?" she asked, and Mark opened his mouth to stop her, but the woman shook her head quickly. "No, sweetheart, thank you," she said, though her eyes lingered on the food a second too long. Mark noticed. He always noticed hunger, he'd worn it like a second skin for years after his wife died. Silence stretched awkwardly, punctured only by the clink of cutlery and the hiss of the coffee machine, and Mark tried to focus on his eggs, but something about the woman gnawed at him, a familiarity he couldn't place. Her hands were rough but clean, her posture guarded, and when the waitress came by and asked what she'd like, the woman hesitated before ordering only a cup of hot water, and Mark felt a flash of anger at a world that reduced people to this. Lily leaned closer to her, whispering conspiratorially, "My daddy works a lot," and Mark sighed. "Lily," he warned gently, but the woman smiled, a real smile this time, though sadness lurked beneath it. "He must love you very much," she said, and Mark swallowed hard because he did, even when he felt like love wasn't enough anymore. Minutes passed, and Mark noticed the woman slipping sugar packets into her coat pocket, her movements discreet but practiced, and something twisted in his chest, not judgment, but recognition. He remembered doing the same thing once, years ago, when Lily was a baby and the hospital bills had drowned them. Without thinking, he pushed his untouched toast toward her. "You should eat," he said gruffly. She froze, eyes wide, pride warring with need, before quietly breaking off a piece and thanking him like it meant more than food. They talked then, in fragments. Her name was Anna, she'd fallen on hard times, she was just passing through, carefully vague answers that told Mark she didn't want pity or probing questions. When they finished, Mark paid the bill, noticing Anna try to hide her disappointment when he didn't offer more, and as they stood to leave, Lily hugged her suddenly, arms wrapping around Anna's waist. "I hope things get better for you," Lily said earnestly, and Anna closed her eyes, holding the child like she might shatter if she moved. "Me too," she whispered. Outside, rain had started again, and as Mark buckled Lily into the car, he glanced back at the diner window. Anna stood inside, watching them leave, her hand pressed to the glass, her expression unreadable, and Mark had the strangest feeling that this moment, this shared table, wasn't finished with him yet. Mark didn't see Anna again for weeks, and life rushed back in to fill the space with its usual chaos, missed school forms, late rent notices, the grinding exhaustion of working construction by day and driving rideshare at night. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, he thought of her eyes, the way they carried both fear and strength, and he wondered where she'd gone. Then one night, after a 12-hour shift that left his hands numb and his patience thin, Mark pulled into the nearly empty supermarket parking lot to buy discounted bread, and there she was, crouched beside a shopping cart under a flickering light, sorting through discarded cardboard boxes. He almost drove past. He told himself he didn't have time, didn't have money, didn't have the emotional capacity, but then she looked up, recognition flashing across her face, and for a second neither of them moved. "Hi," she said quietly. "Hi," he replied, heart pounding, and without really deciding to, he parked and got out. They talked again, this time more openly, the walls worn down by shared embarrassment and the cold night air. Anna admitted she'd been sleeping in shelters when she could, on buses when she couldn't, that she'd lost her job, then her apartment, then the people she thought would help her, and Mark listened, his jaw clenched, because he knew how fast a life could unravel. "You don't have to do this alone," he said finally, surprising himself, and she laughed bitterly. "Everyone says that," she replied. "Then they disappear." Mark hesitated, then offered something small but concrete, hot food, a ride to the shelter, and Anna accepted, cautiously, like someone expecting the floor to give way beneath her. Over the next weeks, she became a quiet presence in their lives, never asking for much, always grateful, helping Lily with homework when Mark worked late, cooking simple meals, sleeping on the couch when the shelter was full, and Mark told himself it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet. But there were things that didn't add up. Anna was too educated, too composed when she forgot to hide it, using words that didn't fit the image she presented, flinching when Mark mentioned certain company names on the radio. And one night, when Lily was asleep, Mark found Anna sitting at the table, staring at a document she hadn't meant to leave out, a legal notice, old but significant, bearing the name of a multinational corporation Mark recognized instantly. When he asked her about it, her face went pale, and for a long time she said nothing. Then, finally, she told him the truth, or part of it. She'd been a senior financial analyst, uncovering fraud so massive it threatened powerful people who'd destroyed her career, frozen her accounts, erased her professional existence. "I tried to do the right thing," she said, voice breaking, "and I lost everything." Mark stared at her, disbelief and anger crashing together, and suddenly the pieces fell into place, the dignity beneath the poverty, the fear, the watchfulness. "Why tell me?" he asked. Anna looked at him, eyes steady. "Because you showed me kindness when you had nothing to gain," she said. "And because I don't think this is an accident anymore." She explained that she'd been tracking the fallout of the case quietly, living off-grid, waiting for the right moment to surface, and Mark realized with a chill that his life had brushed up against something much bigger, much darker, than he'd ever imagined. Fear crept in then, for Lily, for himself, but so did resolve, because he'd already crossed the line back in that diner, back when he'd shared his table. The truth unraveled quickly after that, like a thread pulled too hard to stop, and Mark found himself standing in courtrooms he'd only seen on TV, watching Anna testify with a calm authority that stunned everyone who remembered her as the poor woman from the shelters. The evidence she'd preserved, backed up, hidden, protected, toppled executives, exposed corruption, and ignited headlines across the country, and when the dust settled, restitution followed, not just for Anna, but for hundreds of employees harmed by the fraud. Mark sat in the back of the courtroom with Lily, holding her hand, watching Anna reclaim her life piece by piece, and when it was over, she found them, tears streaming down her face. "You saved me," Anna said, and Mark shook his head. "No," he replied softly. "We saved each other." Months later, life looked different. Mark promoted at work through a connection he'd never expected, Lily thriving, laughter returning to their small apartment, and Anna, now restored to a position of influence, never forgot the table she'd been allowed to share. She funded shelters, scholarships, legal aid, and one quiet diner became a symbol in her speeches of how dignity could change destinies. On the anniversary of that rainy Sunday, the three of them sat together again, pancakes between them, and Lily grinned. "See," she said, "sharing is good." Mark smiled, heart full, understanding finally that unbelievable things don't always begin with grand gestures, but with a simple question, asked humbly, and a simple yes, given without knowing just how much it would cost, or save.